Morning all, the Sinquefield Cup continues to be mega exciting. Caruana, who was on the staggering score of 7 out of 7, was playing white yesterday against Magnus Carlsen. So could Carlsen stop Caruana's relentless run mowing down the field? Caruana kicked off the game with e4 and Magnus played the Sicilian defence. So no boring Berlin, thankfully. So the Sicilian defence makes a statement, a fighting game, and in fact after knight f3 we see now knight c6, and now white played d4. Another move is bishop b5, for example, treating this positionally like a royal of pairs, but d4 an open Sicilian, c takes, knight takes d4. And now Magnus Carlsen played the accelerated dragon g6, and you'll note in the accelerated dragon, because black hasn't played knight f6, white hasn't been forced to commit a knight to c3 here, and this gives an extra option. Given that white doesn't have to play knight c3, white can impose the dreaded Maroczy bind, and this is played c4. I think this is actually the most popular move in this position to inflict the dreaded Maroczy bind. It's more popular actually than knight c3 slightly in livebook. So c4, this bind on that d5 break, and also b5 is influenced. Both these pawn breaks later are kind of discouraged. So knight f6, knight c3, d6. Okay, freeing the bishop a little bit. f3, and white is still playing with this structure, which is common against normal dragons, but with this extra c4 pawn here, black's activity in the center is severely restricted. Magnus now plays knight takes d4. After queen takes d4, bishop g7. For the moment the bishop is unprotected. There's no naughty things going on attacking the queen that easily. Bishop e3. Now black castles and protects that bishop. So actually black is threatening knight g4 now. The queen steps out of the way. Now Magnus Carlsen in this position doesn't bother with any a6 b5 plan. In fact, King's Indian players might find this interesting. a5 is played. It weakens, of course, the b5 square. There is a downside, but it's increasing the activity. And if a4, a3, this diagonal could be emphasized. Okay, so should that be allowed? Well, in this position, a little subtle positional move is played b3. Very interesting, because actually a4 is technically possible in this position. And it is played. If knight takes a4, then knight takes e4, and we see that bishop hitting the rook. And this is very good for black. And if b takes, well, then the structure is really compromised here, and black's having a great time of it. Now after knight d7, nice blockade squares. So the intention for white in playing b3 was actually to react to this with the move b4. So white's got that b5 square under control. So it seems both b5 and d5 are a long way off for black. A slight Achilles heel, though, of this b4 idea is c4 is slightly more vulnerable. The pawn is less able to be protected by its fellow b pawn here with b3 anymore. And in fact, Magnus Carlsen focuses attention on the c4 pawn. He plays bishop e6. And white prepares to defend this with rook c1 now, against things like rook c8. So knight d7 though is played. Bishop shows its glare, but also knight b6 now to try and torture this pawn. Bishop e2. Knight b6. So what do we want to do with this pawn? Interesting moves like knight d5 could shield the pawn, but actually knight b5 was played. But before we check those out, let's just rule out c5. It doesn't look right. D takes. Black should be okay here. Knight c4, and black's doing well here. So white has to do something about c4. Now this move knight b5 facilitates knight a3. I think this was part of the attraction of playing knight b5. Now for example, if rook c8 we can comfortably defend with knight a3, but is the knight misplaced? A bit controversial, but on the other hand, what is black doing? The d5 bind is still in place here. If we examine this position for a little bit, let's look at f5. E takes, bishop takes. I think this is comfortable for white. A small advantage positioning. What does white really look forward to here? I think we can just say it's comfortable. Magnus Carlsen actually ruled out knight a3 technically off the board by playing a3. So supported by the rook, ruling out knight a3. But another way would have been knight d5 to play this position, slightly different. Again, this looks comfortable as well and quite logical. I mean, I think actually the engines at certain depths actually prefer knight d5 here. So if taking, we can take with either pawn, but I think c pawn might be. We can take with either really. It's a very delicate balance to the side, which is better, very hard. But here, yeah, white's got a small advantage still, as you'd expect. But is it enough to try and win the game? Not necessarily. I think black hasn't got too many weaknesses or anything. So anyway, knight b5, very interesting for this knight a3 idea, and that's extinguished. And now, by encouraging that pawn to commit, actually this knight now goes back, threatening immediately knight takes e6. Magnus wants to preserve his light squared bishop. Bishop d7 is played, and here things get really interesting indeed. White could simply castle, but doesn't do this. I think white stands fine here. He's got that bind and could torture back black for quite a long time. I think Anatoly Karpov liked playing with the Roxy bind quite a lot against Sicilians and trying to suffocate the opponent's counterplay more generally as a style of play. But no, instead we see a different kind of style and approach to the position. White goes for black's king with h4. Is it justified? Well, why not here? Black can't react very easily now, either on the queen side or in the centre. He's committed his hands on the queen side. In the centre it looks as though there's no those prospects of central breaks anytime soon. Now here Magnus really is faced with very, very crude caveman attacks like taking bishop h6 and then getting mated on the h-file. So how does black react here? One idea might be e5. It does compromise, of course, it creates this backward pawn, which looks really unpleasant. But always, black seems to have resources here, so that looks interesting as well. In the game, actually, Magnus played h5. And actually, this is quite an undermining move, in effect, because this structure seems really solid. You can't imagine at all at this moment this diagonal being softened up. But actually h5 is softening up this diagonal, and we're about to see this in this game. g4 is played, trying to open up the lines. And Magnus takes this, not fearing here h5. h5 is a very violent move and needs calculation. In the game we see f takes g4. But let's have a quick look at h5, just for fun. I think black's best technically, if he doesn't want to be wiped out that easily, is to play e5. The knight can go back here. Forcing the knight back here is interesting. And now we're carrying on this undermining operation of this structure by taking now. So the knight can't take. That's important. Bishop e6, and it seems here, although it's a very dangerous looking attack now, it seems black just about has enough resources. There are some fun lines here, for example, like this, check, rook h6, which is a common sort of tactic. Queen f6, rook takes g6, with the idea of bishop h5. Black always seems to have enough resources, though, with rook h8, believe it or not. So even if white wins the queen here, the white queen is trapped. So in this sort of position, which I've analysed earlier, black is okay. Crazy stuff. So it starts from this idea that this h5, yeah, it looks really dangerous, but it seems the energetic e5. A point of note, really quite instructive point of note actually, I find quite revealing. Why it's so important to drive the knight here is demonstrated actually if black dares take on f3 first. The move knight takes f3 looks to almost win by force in this position. And I want to show you why actually. The knight can use g5 and actually facilitate in this drilling down this diagonal. So for example, let's say e5, well, it looks pretty grim actually, e5, but let's say e5, white takes, and then plays knight g5. The threats now include bishop takes b6 and queen d5 check. So you see that knight is a really aggressive knight relevant to black's king safety basically. That's the point to make here. So that's why high precision defense, I think, dictates that against h5 black plays e5. I believe this is the case anyway at the depth of analysis I've checked. Here I don't think there's anything better than knight b3. I think knight f5 black are just there's adequate resources there basically. So the knight goes back and then g takes. It's just very, very risky to take on f3. So it's something to bear in mind here. This maneuver is actually leaving this knight as an attacking force. Okay, some other lines which I had looked at instead. There's a line here, knight d7. Sorry, after h5. No, after fg. Okay, let's go to the game continuation now. You can see the analysis notes in the description of the video. I'll provide the PGM for some other variations if you want to explore them. So let's go with the game. h5 wasn't played. It seems, very, very scary for black, but f takes was played, and it's still very, very scary because h5 is still on the cards. So Magnus reacts now with e5, and here you might think, well, given I mentioned knight f3 a lot, but actually here in this position bishop takes g4 is perfectly, I think, okay for black after taking that pawn. So the knight is still in effect forced to go to b3 to consider b3 instead. Okay, keeping hold of that g pawn. And now Magnus hits this diagonal, which is basically undermining that pawn chain. He hits this diagonal really hard now. Really, really hard. So bishop f3 now hits it again, seemingly compromising his own king safety a little bit in the process with f5. Very energetic play from Magnus Carlsen, as you would expect from the world champion. He's not going to get hacked up that easily. G takes is played, which seems entirely logical to open up that G file. And I thought at the time Queen G2 looked quite neat because it simultaneously protects E4 and creates that pin. It's interesting, but it's not entirely convincing. F4, for example, knight A4. Black seems to have adequate defensive resources here. So yeah, it's an interesting position. Okay, so here instead another interesting move is played, which is probably more accurate actually, knight A5, trying to get rid of black's light square bishop. Pardon me. Not me. Now Magnus reacts with F4 here. If he plays, let's say F takes, then white plays knight takes, hitting the queen, and that's a massive position to have with that light square bishop, hitting all sorts of things. If D5 here, I think, well, we just take. We've got good control of D5 still. C takes, and if C takes, then we just play bishop takes. if knight takes, then we just play all sorts of things. Okay, so like bishop g5. We don't want to give white the light square bishop for nothing. So, or do we? Under certain circumstances it might be okay, and Magnus calculates actually that on f4, which keeps this bishop locked in by its own pawn on e4, this might be okay to give up the light square bishop. Now here actually knight takes c6 might not actually work very well because of f takes, hitting the queen. So here we see the bishop going back, but now Magnus really offers the light square bishop on a plate here with knight a4. It frees up the queen because bishop takes b6 was an annoying threat. Knight b2 could also help stop any rook d1s, so the knight coming here rather cheekily stops knight d1, so it's multi-purpose move all in one. White now could leave this tension of taking on c6. It's a very complicated position. I mean, white could play rook g1. I mean, it seems quite dangerous, but where is the knockout blow? If we go like this, where is the knockout blow exactly? I think king e2 keeps the king quite safe. It's just comfortable looking positions, very aggressive looking positions, but always it seems black has, like, you know, defensive resources available. So let's not get too deeply into that. White actually just took on c6 and strangely castled here. There's actually no apparent reason for castling. In fact, this h-pawn looks a bit fragile on castling. I think white with the bishop pair here could easily consider king e2. How to get at white's king? I mean, the bind is still on here, and this looks to be, you know, a clear advantage for white. This sort of position looks you know, there's an advantage for white anyway. But where are the knockout blows available? Say knight b2. It's difficult to see a forced win, but it looks comfortable for white. In the game, okay, castling, interesting, very interesting. It seems you know, white's interested in moving the king and using the g-file with the rooks like this. Okay, so the king's potentially a bit safer than on e2 in some lines, you can imagine. Now Magnus played c5 here, which discourages white from ever playing c5. It wants a dark square blockade, so if it takes, well, actually maybe it's better just to take here, and this should be okay for black. So trying to fix down white's pawns with c5. On any b5, it seems potentially, you know, this pawn's easily blockaded. But it's played anyway. b5. Black's actually threatening, well, to take here and use maybe the c5 blockade. So b5 was played. Technically, of course, a pass pawn, but it's not really the major thing about this position. Bishop f6. Now king h1 is played, offering h4, and it shows actually, you know, there's definitely not enough time to take this. If bishop takes h4, black's going to be wiped out. Check, and rook g4, and this is absolute murder for black, this position. As an example, bishop f6, bishop takes c5, threatening queen h2. So if rook f7 to defend against that, bishop takes d6 here, chewing up black's pawn chain. We've got two passed pawns now. That's crushing for white. The king has got the g2 square here, and just material up. Okay, so king h1, this pawn definitely can't be taken. Knight b6. Now here we reach a critical moment in the game, actually, and it reminds me of, there's a classic game in Fisher's Memorable Games book where he says about the wrong rook. There's this key game with the wrong rook. Now here, it seems, with the benefit of hindsight and 2020 vision of computer calculation, it seems that the right rook is to the f rook to leave the c pawn protected. Okay, so easy to say in retrospect. Let's have a quick look as an example of why this is really, it seems a lot better than using the c rook. So with the c pawn protected, what if black attacks the c pawn? Well, bishop takes c5 is possible here. And this pin is really annoying. If d takes, then queen g2 check, and we've got we're winning the queen here, so that's winning for white this position. And you might think, well, rook takes c4 or something. What else can black do? Not rook takes c4. We just take here, and then that's winning the rook. But knight takes c4, and this is crazy. This is crazy. I don't know if Caruana might have miscalculated here, but it's really cheeky, some of the variations here to do with taking on c4. It's incredibly cheeky stuff. So basically, rook takes c4 looks as though whites in some ways are winning this, because off the check, winning this material, it's with taking here on c4. But actually, black in this move has a great move, queen c8, using the pin and coming to h3. So if white has to spend time on king h2 here, this should actually be nearly like it looks equal-ish, this position. So that's a really crazy continuation. The thing is, this doesn't really work. Actually, if we go back to this position here with knight takes c4, in this position white can do a lot better than rook c4, it seems. White can actually play queen c2 here, and this looks terrible for black. Queen d7, okay, creates a bit of a scare around the king here, but queen takes check, king g1, and white's able to defend this with material up, for example, like this. Okay, so yeah, it seems in retrospect, 2020 vision, in this critical position, it seems that rook fd1 has a lot going for it. I can't actually imagine, I can't see a defense if it's not rook a4. The thing is, okay, let's examine also bishop e7. We just take here again, because of taking we have this check, winning the queen. So this looks horrible. If king h8, in this position, okay, it looks as though h4's a problem. Queen h2 might be technically most accurate, because we can always win d6. As soon as this is taken, we can win d6. It takes here when it's going into a pin anyway. Rook takes d6. Actually, we've got things like this coming up. That's diabolically bad for black. So yeah, it does seem as though this could have really put Caruana's performance on 8 out of 8. This just moving the right rook here. So that's something about chess, this idea that you can have the advantage, but to win a one game is the hardest thing. Although Caruana's doing a pretty good job so far in this tournament of winning every single game, but it just so happens here, it seems this was a major inaccuracy, probably his first major inaccuracy of the entire tournament, not to play rook fd1. So we can see after rook cd1 that black is counter-attacking c4. Now knight takes c4 immediately just falls to the check, picking up the knight. So the king just steps out of the way. But with c4 attacked, yes, it's also h4 is attacked. You can't go back and choose a better move here, because if rook c1, then bishop takes h4. So yeah, the moment's passed, it seems here. So white now takes on d6, and we get the exchange of queens with knight takes c4, and it seems black has enough here to draw this position after knight e3, forking the rook, so getting rid of white's bishop pair, and now also, of course, opposite colored bishops. So bishop e2, bishop takes h4, and it's pretty drawish actually, this position from here. Let's see what happens. So Rook F5 was played. Rook takes, e takes, and now wanting exchange of rooks. If the rook refuses, I think this is okay with rook d2, and dangerous for a2 now as well. So this is looking quite dangerous for white. Doesn't want to go down this path. So in fact, we have an exchange of rooks now, opposite coloured bishops, and we get a draw soon with this position. After king e4, c4 was played to preserve this pawn with bishop b6. I don't think if king takes, then nothing's going on here really after bishop takes c4. So in fact, bishop takes c4 was played there, bishop b6, and black can just carry on, reverberating the bishop. White doesn't really want to try getting king to c6 here. I think that would be a losing attempt, even though it seems the bishop's covering e2. Let's have a quick look at that. In the game, bishop d3 and then drawn at move 42. The answer to life universe and everything, move 42. But let's imagine king d5. Black can just play this, and if here, bishop d4, and if we try for this pawn, it seems actually this is losing for white, actually, because there's still bishop a7 lurking around here. So black just charges with his e pawn. So we've got bishop a7, and we're going to have king f3 e2. This is a great way for white to lose if he wanted to try for a win here. And that's horrible, because then, for example, we win this bishop, and we've got this position is easy win with pawn there. So yeah, white can't try and win this position with a king march. So the critical moment, let's just go back to the critical moment in the game. Let's just rewind. Here, around about here, in fact, this might not have been the best move order with knight b6 either at move 28, before this seemingly strong, very, very strong move here was played. If king h8, for example, that might be nicking this pawn now. So rook g1. There's even resources like rook a7. It just seems that that would have been a better idea than moving the knight back. It's a very, very complicated position. But another perk of the knight, it's always got knight b2. So this position with knight b6 seems an inaccuracy, although it's putting pressure on c4. If Magnus had actually just waited here, it seems if for example rook fd1 now, then we can just take this. That's not a problem here. It's just in the game it is after knight b6. Because bishop takes h4 here, there's that killer check, which makes a lot of difference for rook g4. This makes a huge amount of difference, that check. So yeah, there was a kind of blunder from Magnus then at move 28. This is where all the action happened. Very, very complex position. Knight b6 was played. It seems in this position the advantage isn't decisive right now. In theory, it seems king h8, rook f7, or rook a7 are all actually viable moves. This could even help with like things like Rook G7 or maybe even Rook H7 later. So this is another viable move. If Rook here in this position, we can again take here, and any check, you know, this is not as dangerous. This is better for black. So yeah, a strange opportunity there after knight b6. Okay, so Rook fd1. Interesting. So bishop takes h4 here. We can just revert back to this check and then Rook g4. So black has actually got this backward pawn issue. So even a world champion with a backward pawn, it's a pretty dangerous position to have. They still have to defend it sometimes. So yeah, it just seems as though this would be a big problem for Magnus. So a bit of a let off there, let off the hook. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.